Surgeon General Vivek Murthy issued an advisory late last week urging tech companies to take action to fight misinformation circulating on social media.
Reporters asked President Biden about it. Let's take a look.
What's your message to platforms like Facebook?
They're killing people. I mean, it really, look, the only pandemic we have is among the unvaccinated. And they're killing people.
Facebook pushed back on Biden's assessment, saying that the platform will, quote, not be distracted by accusations which aren't supported by the facts, adding that, quote, the facts show that Facebook is helping save lives.
Here to weigh in on what those facts are is Democratic strategist Michael Starr Hopkins and White House reporter for Real Clear Politics, Philip Wegman. Welcome, gentlemen.
Morning to be here.
Let me start with you, Michael. I want to know if you think that from the left, from the perspective of the left here, is the Biden administration's approach, I mean, I'd love to know what their criteria is, what the Biden administration's criteria for misinformation is, how they define that. I think that's an important part. So even before we know that information, is this defensible? Is this position from the Biden administration defensible at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, let me first say, Facebook is not saving anyone's life. When you look at the biggest content producers on Facebook, it's people like Ben Shapiro, Bongino from Fox News. Like, it's not actual hard news. So the information being pushed out to the majority of Facebook viewers isn't exactly reputable news. And there's silos in Facebook. It's true on the Democratic side and the Republican side. The problem is now when you look at the statistics across the country, it's in Republican-led states where you're seeing these spikes. And that's directly attributable to social media and this echo.
Super quick follow-up to that, though. Like, I mean, how many lives did Eric Swalwell literally kill when he said stop wearing masks back in May? I mean, if the criteria is that you're literally killing people by expressing your interpretation of the scientific literature, how many people did Eric Swalwell kill with that tweet?
But there's a difference between misinformation and us actually not understanding how the virus worked. We all thought a year and a half ago that you didn't need to wear masks, myself included. And then once the science changed and it caught up, then everyone knew we should be wearing masks. And you still had people on the right saying, don't wear masks, this is a hoax. That's misinformation. I think there's a big difference between not understanding the science and intentionally misleading people.
Well, I think Anthony Fauci would fall into that category of intentionally misleading people as well.
Right. There was some like actual intentional misleading going on at that time. Philip, how's the White House responding to this situation over the last few days? You know, they were pretty aggressively saying that social media companies need to be cracking down. Why aren't you banning more people? If you're banned on one platform, why are you allowed to still be on another one? Have they evolved at all under pressure, or are they feeling like this is a good message for them?
It's a great question, because to set the table here, if we rewind, 1 or 2 weeks ago, you saw that the Biden administration was saying publicly and repeatedly that they were going the persuasion route. They weren't going to coerce anyone to get the vaccine. They weren't talking about, forcing government contractors or anyone at agencies to do this. They were strongly encouraging people to get the vaccine. What happened? Well, you had a lot of people from the left, like Kathleen Sebelius and others, who were saying, we're tired of this. This isn't moving quickly enough. You missed your 4th of July goal. You had very significant early success, but that was low-hanging fruit. What does the administration decide to do next? They come out and they say, look, social media companies are not doing enough to police this information. In fact, we've pointed some misinformation out to them specifically. That's what Jen Psaki said last Thursday. She said that they pointed out specific posts. And any sort of considerations about whether or not this is going to chill free speech or whether or not this is actually effective, those are sort of thrown to the wayside. And the administration says, as we saw in that clip, well, the people that we disagree with who are not complying in terms of the way that we get our message out, they're literally killing people. That's the message from the White House thus far.
Yeah, and Phil, you were at that briefing, and I think we have sound of Jen Psaki talking about this issue.
For how long has the administration been spying on people's Facebook profiles looking for vaccine misinformation?
Well, that was quite a loaded and inaccurate question, which I would refute. How? Well, Peter, first of all, as you know, we're in a regular touch with a range of media outlets.
And we expect the White House to watch
Let me
you
finish.
watch, but
As
nothing
we
goes
are
on Facebook
as we
and
are
Facebook.
in regular touch with social media platforms. This is publicly open information. People sharing information online, just as you are all reporting information on your news stations, providing for Facebook or other platforms to measure and publicly share the impact of misinformation on their platform and the audience it's reaching. Also with the public, with all of you, to create robust enforcement strategies that bridge their properties and provide transparency about rules. You shouldn't be banned from one platform and not others for providing misinformation out there.
Okay, so as you heard in that soundbite, Psaki said that a ban on one platform should translate into being banned across multiple platforms. Michael, would you support that? Do you support the federal government making a suggestion like that and being actively sort of involved in flagging posts that contain information they would then suggest should be banned by multiple corporations unilaterally, depending on the criteria of what constitutes misinformation, when we had this entire administration telling us that the Hunter Biden story was Russian disinformation, when we had all of this problems with defining what misinformation early in COVID was? Should the federal government really be having these conversations with tech companies and suggesting those unilateral cross-platform bans?
So I have no problem with the White House suggesting that someone who's spreading misinformation be banned. It's up to the private marketplace itself to act on that and decide what to do. But what I do have a problem with is Peter Doocy's question, because one, you can't spy on someone for public activities, and he knows that. But the reason he's doing it and phrasing it like that is because there's a right-wing narrative, which we all know, that the government is the deep state and we should all mistrust the government. And it feeds into a broader narrative that's really unhealthy and really dangerous, and why we continue to have problems with people getting vaccinated, primarily in Republican states. It's not like we're having the same issue in Democratic states that we're seeing in Republican states. Yes, numbers are going up in all 50 states, but it's primarily because Republicans are refusing to get vaccinated. And that is going to lead to more deaths, not just for Republicans, but for Democrats as well.
Yeah. And Philip, how does the White House handle the question of, let's say, the lab leak, which was basically getting you banned a year ago if you were openly engaging with the question of whether the virus leaked out of a lab somehow, and has now become kind of like, probably there's been an overcorrection where everybody's like, yeah, I guess it was a lab leak. So how does the White House handle that question of truth being so contingent on who's saying it and when it's being said?
It's a question that was put to Jen Psaki last week by Peter Doocy, and eventually also on the question of whether or not what Fauci said early in the pandemic, whether or not what you said about masks not being needed, whether that was disinformation now, right? And so Psaki kind of maybe underscores the opposition's argument when she says, well, the science has changed. Well, if the science has changed, if things that were at one time misinformation because they were out of step with the scientific consensus are now in step with the scientific consensus, whether that's, lab leak or the efficacy of masks or what have you, that leads you to a conclusion that sometimes we just don't know specifically. The Surgeon General has a sort of very malleable definition of what is and is not misinformation. But if Doocy's questions were loaded to the White House isn't exactly being very transparent here. And yeah, they might just suggest to Facebook, hey, here's some misinformation, please take it down. But when you're the federal government, when you have a monopoly on force, when you're the one who's regulating these tech companies and can, regulate them into oblivion in theory, I'm not saying that they will, but, in theory they could, then that suggestion isn't just, hey, can you clean up your act? That has the force of law. The words of an administration are tantamount to actions here. And what don't we know from the White House? Well, I asked Jen Psaki on Friday, how long has this program been going on? Are you pointing out specific posts or general areas of misinformation? What is your process for identifying misinformation? And finally, are there any safeguards to make certain that you're not chilling free speech? Those should be basic questions that you should be able to answer. Instead, I got a 1,000-word word salad and that ended with, people are literally at risk of dying.
Well, those are important questions, and the White House better come up with answers to them really quickly, because who's supposed to trust anyone? The problem comes when you pretend that you have a monopoly on this information, that you're the authority, when in reality, capital S science does change, and these things do change. And so to pretend that you're the be-all, end-all of capital F facts and capital S science is just ridiculous, and I think that's what sows distrust. Thank you both so much for a fantastic discussion this morning.
Thanks.
Well, next on Rising, journalist Zed Jelani discusses the Biden administration's handling of crime. That's when we return.